We're back again with another video, and in this video it's going to be really cool. We're going to test 4 different ways to paint MDF, and we're going to teach you which one is the best and what applications you might use each one in. Stay tuned, that's coming up right now.
Double-digit thousands.
Alright guys, we're in my shed, so you're going to notice that I am wearing a sweatshirt because it's very cold outside. You can also maybe hear that it's raining. And that's because you can hear it on the roof. But let's show you the 4 different ways. I've already prepped these. You notice that I cut the sides off and glued them together. That way we have the edge grain showing, because a lot of people want to know how to cover the edge grain. So we're going to be talking about that in this video. They've all been prepped by sanded down, and we're going to do 4 different ones. So the first one that we're going to teach you is Bondo. Now Bondo is a really great one. We're going to teach you why we might use Bondo and when. We're going to use just a shellac based primer. We're going to try Glazing Putty everything, which is a glazing putty, which we'll show here, and wood glue in water, which is going to be a 50-50 mixture. We'll talk a little bit more about that. These are the 4 that we're going to do. So let's go ahead and start off with Bondo, show you how it's done, and tell you why you might use Bondo. Alright guys, so here's some Bondo. You can use whatever kind you want. What you are going to want when you use Bondo is you're going to want a scrap piece of wood like this, and you're also going to need an applicator like this. Now you can use any type of applicator you want. This is actually a Bondo approved applicator. Now Bondo itself is not hardened. Okay, so Bondo, you're going to see inside there, it's almost like it's a thick viscosity of a substance, and it's very smelly. So that's one reason why a lot of people don't like to use Bondo, is because of the smell. However, you can get fantastic results with Bondo. Let me show you what I mean. First thing we're going to want to do is stick a little Bondo on a scrap piece, like so. Now, one of the problems that people have with Bondo besides the smell is that Bondo sets very, very hard. Now, this is way more than I actually need. And when I say Bondo sets very hard, what I mean to say is that Bondo sets very, very fast. Now it's not super fast, but you do want to work quickly enough. So on small projects, it's really nice because you can do the whole project without worrying about it really hardening up. But if you have a really large project, you're going to have to break it down into sections and do. It's not made to cover like an entire car in one sitting. The more of the hardening that you put on, the harder it's going to get. And of course, the harder it's going to get a little bit, that's going to affect, of course, sanding. It's also going to affect the drying time. The harder it is, actually the faster it dries. So let's go ahead and mix this up. First thing we're going to do is mix up our hardener with this, and we're going to go ahead and apply this to the wood. Now the biggest thing that we want to pay attention to when we apply this to the Bondo is to make sure that we're actually covering all the seams. So we want to cover those seams. So let's go ahead and move some of these out of the way. I'll stick the Bondo front and center so you can see that while it's drying. Guys, Bondo really doesn't take very much long. It's kind of like an epoxy. Once you mix it up and you get it to the right color and you know that it's ready to smooth on, you just go ahead and apply it. Like right now, I'm at a good spot, so I'm going to go ahead and start applying this. Biggest thing is to get a nice even coat, because you don't really want to do a lot of sanding with Bondo, although I'm going to be the first to admit that I'm not great with Bondo. However, if used properly, Bondo can get you what I believe are the best results on any MDF project. And that's because basically what we're doing is we're creating a layer on top that, there we go. I'll take some of this off before we go. You're basically creating a whole new skin on this MDF. And so nothing's going to penetrate that. And that's really important for MDF, because we know that moisture can have a negative impact on MDF. It'll make it swell, it'll make it bulge, and it'll raise the grain, and you'll have issues trying to fix that. Now the rest of this will sand out. That's not the greatest job. Like I said, I'm not the best Bondo person in the world. There are probably some of you guys who are looking at me saying, man, you are not very good at that. And you'd be correct. You are probably better at this with me. And you know what the great thing is? If you're better at this than me, then you should have no problem getting fantastic results on MDF. At least that's the way that I see it. Let's move to the next one. Alright guys, the next one is wood glue and water. Now, there's a lot of reasons why you might want to use wood glue and water, and the first is it is absolutely cheap. In fact, you probably have everything on hand because you had to glue this with something. And of course, water, you probably have some on tap. So, what we need for this, just some water in a cup. Use something clean, you know. Don't go get dirty water. We're going to take some, I actually have some glue in here. And you can use any type of wood glue you want. Don't worry about the brand. You can use whatever kind you want. This is actually in a thing called a glue bot, which is kind of a cool little thing that I like. Helps me get the glue where I want it to be and not just all over the place, which is nice, especially when you're gluing. Alright. Now, the goal that most people are going to tell you to do is about a 50-50 mixture of glue to water. I'm going to tell you that that's less important than you might think. What do I mean by that? Don't worry about it being exactly 50-50. However, what I should tell you is that the more glue you have in there, the harder it is to sand. Also, the more water you have in there, the harder it is to get a nice even layer, right? Because it's going to be more liquidy. So you're just going to want to stir this until you get the viscosity that you want. So you might need to add more glue, like I'm going to do right now, because I feel like it's too liquidy. And then once you get the right viscosity, you're just going to paint this on. And once again, you're going to use some type of applicator. This stuff can last a long time. So when you have a big project, this is probably one of the cheapest routes to go. It doesn't cost much. You have water, like we've already established, and you already have wood glue. So the cost really is the amount of time that it takes to apply this. There are some things I don't like about this, and I'm going to talk about that right now. And the first, I'm going to go ahead and use just one of these to apply it. It really doesn't matter what you apply it with. I'm going to rip this down a little just because it's a little too big to get in the cup. But a couple things I don't like about it. One, it almost always takes multiple coats. You're going to need 2 or 3 coats. But 2, because it dries pretty clear, it's hard to tell if you're going to have any problem areas until after you paint it. So once you paint this, you may end up realizing that you need to go back over and seal some areas. Now it's going to seal all the end grain. What I'm talking about is in these areas right here, which is where all of your MDF meets. When all that MDF meets, sometimes you have trouble sealing that because you have some unevenness there or some areas that the glue seeps down into, and you won't necessarily notice that right away. Now let's go ahead and set these aside, and let's talk about glazing putty. So this one is glazing putty, and glazing putty is very interesting. You will not want to do glazing putty on an entire big project because they come in small tubes like this typically, and something like this is, although not expensive, if you had to do an entire project, you wouldn't want to do it. Now you can actually use one thin layer of glazing putty to not only fill in the gaps here, but also cover all the MDF so you don't have to prime it. You can go right on and paint it. That's what we're going to be doing right now, and we're going to show you what that looks like. So we're going to go ahead and pop that on there, and hopefully we'll have enough. Now we also need an applicator for this. We use the same Bondo applicator. Let me go ahead and clean this off so that we can use that. Alright, so here we go. Let's go ahead and just this. Now this goes on much smoother and easier than Bondo, which is one of the reasons why it's really nice. It also sands very easily, which is nice. Bondo's not always the easiest to sand. However, because it sands so easy, it's very easy to sand right on through it as well. And that can also be a problem. You don't want to sand through it. If you sand through it, it's not going to do its job. You're going to have uneven spots. You're going to have some spots that hit the MDF and raise the grain, and you're going to have some spots that don't. So you don't want to do that. So let's go ahead and put the glazing putty aside and talk about the last one. The last one is a shellac-based primer. Now, a shellac-based primer, all you have to do is put that on there. However, I say that whenever you're using a shellac-based primer, one of the best things to do is anytime that you have these joints right here, is to go ahead and put something like glazing putty on here. So what's the disadvantage of this? Well, the disadvantage is you have 2 things. You have to put this over all the joints, and then you have to then come back and primer it. Although the advantage is it's very, very quick. The glazing putty only takes a few minutes to dry, and if you're doing a large project, this can be a really quick thing to do. And the shellac base primer itself will actually prime the rest of it, and it dries really quickly, guys. I mean, you're talking maybe 15 to 30 minutes. They may tell you to wait longer. You're going to have to read what yours actually tells you to do. What we'll do is we'll let this dry, and once these dry, we'll sand them down. We'll give another layer of coat to the wood glue and water, and we'll sand this down, and we'll add the shellac base primer. And once that's all finished, guys, we'll paint these, and we'll show you what each one looks like after a few coats and a few sand jobs. And then you can make the decision on which one you think. So we're finished now, and now you want the results. Which one came out the best? Well, actually there is no real best. They all ended up working just fine, and I got a pretty good result on each and every one of them. So I can't say one is definitely the best out of all of them. However, I can tell you a little bit about each one, some of the problems that I had with them or have had with them in the past, and some of the things that I think they would best be used on. So first, we'll talk about the Bondo. The Bondo was by far the one that I got the best surface on. I even brought my wife in here, asked her which one she liked the best, and she said the Bondo. And I think one of the reasons why is the Bondo itself is a really hard surface. And so when you're sanding, you're only sanding off the paint typically. Now, you can sand off the Bondo, don't get me wrong, but it's going to be a lot harder to go through that Bondo than it is some of the other ones, which are pretty soft, like the shellac-based primer or something like the Glazing Putty. And so I think if you're trying to get like a glass-like surface, the Bondo is the best. The problem with the Bondo is it doesn't work great on larger projects because you have to do a lot of small areas in order to equal up or be really fast at it, and it does take some time to get good at Bondo. You're most likely not going to be great at Bondo right away. So that's Bondo, and Bondo actually was my favorite out of all of them. Second one is wood glue and water. Wood glue and water is fantastic. It's cheap. We've already talked about that. The two issues I have with wood glue and water, I did not have the issue on this one, but I have had issues in the past where seams have shown where you glued the two pieces of wood together, and you won't know that until you start painting it. And so it's possible that you need to fill that again with some type of either glazing putty or some more wood glue and water. And so that's an issue. The other issue with wood glue and water is it takes much longer to dry than the other ones. So when you're prepping up your MDF, it's going to take a little bit of time to dry. In my conditions and where I live, it was taking over an hour to do that, where some of the other ones were done in 10 or 15 minutes. So that's a major difference, especially when you're talking about 2 to 3 coats. However, it is cheap, so it's great for large projects. Glazing putty is perfect for smaller projects. It's not very expensive. However, if you're going to use it on a big project, it's going to be a lot more expensive. And like I said earlier, because it's very soft and easy to sand, if you're not careful with your sandpaper, it is possible to sand through that and then have to touch that back up before you can go on with any more painting. So keep that in mind. The shellac-based primer is one of my favorites for medium and even large projects, and the reason why I like it, it's pretty cheap, it does a really good job, and you can usually tell if there's going to be an issue, where with wood glue and water you may not be able to see that. Now we did use some glazing putty on the edges, and I think that's necessary. So for me, the shellac-based primer is one of the best to use in medium and large projects, and you see me use it all the time, so I like that. All right, guys, I hope you learned something today. If you guys have a favorite, I'd love to hear what your favorite is down in the description below and why. Thanks, guys. Enjoy the day. And as always, like the video, share it, and don't forget to subscribe.
Counting double-digit thousands.